What knocks out the lights for 250,000 homes without a single bomb? What bends a nation's voice into a whisper just by flooding it with noise? What invisible parasite spreads through millions of machines that were never meant to meet? Tonight, 3 cases, a worm that wouldn't die, a blackout written in code, and a country reduced to silence by traffic. 3 different nightmares, one shared lesson about the soft seams of our connected lives, and the simple defenses that keep the dark from getting comfortable. We begin in 2008, when the internet was old enough to feel safe and young enough to be wrong. Somewhere, a Windows machine didn't get a patch it needed. Then another, then millions more. The worm didn't break in by brute force. It slipped through a single missed update in an everyday service most people never thought about. It was called Conficker, no ransom note, no manifesto. Just a quiet, relentless spread. The first foothold wasn't cinematic. It was a vulnerability in a Windows component that handled network requests. If you've never patched a machine, it's like not vaccinating your laptop. Somewhere in the background, a missing update left a door unlocked, and Conficker tried the knob. When it found a match, it copied itself across the line, landed, and immediately tried to disappear. It shut off security services, blocked access to antivirus sites, and even disabled some system tools so curious users couldn't look too closely. Like a seasoned thief, it turned the camera toward the wall. From there, escalation came in familiar, human ways. Conficker wasn't just a code wizard, it was a social climber. It spread through network shares by guessing weak passwords. It hopped onto USB drives and used the auto-run feature to spring to life when the stick met a fresh computer. The worm didn't need you to click a red skull. It needed you to do exactly what you always do. Plug in, log in, keep moving, that was enough. Once it owned a machine, it didn't crow about it. Conficker quietly joined a botnet, a remote-controlled crowd, but the way it phoned home was clever. Rather than dialing a fixed address, it generated a swarm of possible rendezvous points, thousands of domain names every day, so defenders couldn't simply cut one wire and sever the head. If you've ever tried to stop a rumor by deleting one message thread, you already understand the trick. Conficker was betting on the chaos of large numbers. Payloads varied, and they were almost mundane: fake antivirus pop-ups, spam relays. The worm was a delivery service more than a detonator. But the scale, that was the terror: millions of machines. At the peak, researchers estimated more than 10 million infected hosts worldwide: homes, businesses, and some organizations that really should never meet a common worm. Disruptions were reported in places where falling behind on updates had consequences you could feel: offices, hospitals, even parts of militaries. In one now famous scramble, administrators in a defense setting had to isolate networks to stop the digital fever. When an infection makes people in uniforms unplug their computers, you understand how deep the roots went. The impact wasn't an explosion, it was friction that never stopped. IT teams lost days and nights to cleaning, patching, reimaging machines that wouldn't let go. Downtime trickled, networks got segmented in a hurry. And the internet, in response, formed something like an immune system. The Conficker Working Group, a rare alliance of companies, researchers, and organizations that don't often sit at the same table, coordinated to sinkhole the domains the worm was trying to contact. Imagine building decoys for every rendezvous point and logging every attempt to meet there. With that, defenders could watch the swarm, hear the heartbeat of a botnet beating too fast. Conficker didn't end in a prison break or a smoking crater. It ended in a long, slow containment, a lesson that you only need one unpatched device to turn a network into a petri dish. And it left behind a rule that feels insultingly basic until you watch what happens when you ignore it. Updates matter, strong passwords matter, little switches like auto-run matter. The worm wasn't magical, it was patient. And patience is often enough. If you trace back the first moment of failure in a big incident, it often looks small from the distance of hindsight. One click, one decision to postpone a reboot. One policy set by default, that no one revisits because something more urgent is on fire. That's the soft scene these attacks look for, not because people are foolish, but because life is busy. The machines we rely on don't ask, they absorb. They pull everything we plug into them, and they keep secrets better than we do, for a while. Now come with me to a quiet, cold evening in December 2015. Snow the color of fluorescent light. A substation at the edge of a town in western Ukraine hums its ordinary hum, a sound you only notice when it stops. In an office nearby, an operator clicks into a control interface. It should be the most boring job in the world. You watch the grid breathe, and you intervene when it sighs. But that night, somewhere on that screen, the enemy is punctual. The mouse moves, not his, and breakers begin to open. The timeline of the attack reads like a textbook on patience. First, the foothold, phishing emails with documents that looked like they belonged in that office. Open the file, enable the content to read it, because we all enable the content when the file came from a colleague, and a small, quiet program runs. It phones home, asks for instructions, and starts picking up keys it finds lying on the table, passwords saved here, tokens stored there, a VPN credential that promises a wider view. Weeks go by, maybe months. The attackers learn the shape of the network the way a burglar learns the creaks of a floorboard. Escalation happens slowly. Remote access is established. Legitimate tools are used to move around because if you mimic the normal, you blend into the pattern. This isn't movie hacking, it's logging in with borrowed keys and acting like you belong. The target is a set of control systems, the software humans use to send commands to machines that do not forgive mistakes. The attackers study that interface long enough to become comfortable. When the day comes, they don't need to tiptoe. They sit in the operator's chair and act like they've been there all year. The payload is unlike most cyber attacks. It's not a digital ransom note or data dump, it's a real-world interruption. In 3 regional electricity distribution companies, circuit breakers open, power lines go quiet, and customers step into unexpected darkness. It's deliberate and methodical. Lights go out across neighborhoods, towns, a small city. Approximately 225,000 customers lose power for hours. This isn't flicker. It's whole blocks of life getting put on pause. Hospitals switch to generators. Call centers flood with "is it just me?" And traffic becomes a negotiation, but the attackers aren't finished. To slow recovery, they write their names on the chalkboard in a different way. They deploy destructive software to wipe some systems into control centers, making it harder to restart the orchestra. They trigger telephone denial of service against customer hotlines so that the people who need to report outages can't get through. It's a layered attack designed to take out the light and muffle the sound of the room at the same time. When that hum stops, human process starts where technology fails. Linemen drive to substations, turn keys, throw manual switches. The grid wasn't built only in software, and that's what saves it. Within hours, power returns in stages. Within a day, most customers are back, but the scar tissue lingers. It takes months to rebuild trust inside those systems. You don't look at a screen the same way after you've watched it do the opposite of what you told it to do. We don't need to argue about which group was behind the attack in this story to understand what matters. What mattered was the simple, familiar path at the start: emails that looked ordinary, documents that requested a click. What mattered was the discipline after the bridge, moving sideways, blending in, learning enough about the environment to push real buttons when the moment arrived. And what mattered most was the impact measured in human hours, cold rooms, generators working overtime, crews doing manual work under a gray sky. When code can turn off light, cyber stops being a metaphor. If stories like this one make your stomach drop, but your mind lean forward, subscribe and turn on notifications. We dive into the dark with care, clarity, and the one promise that matters here: no hype, just lessons that hold up when the power flickers. There's a temptation after an event like that. to imagine that cyber risk belongs only to advanced adversaries and industrial targets, as if the rest of us are spectators. But the internet doesn't separate the residential from the critical the way you'd hope. In 2007, a small European country learned that the hard way. Not just a company, not even a sector, an entire nation, bent under the weight of unwanted attention. The scene was Estonia, and the trigger wasn't an esoteric protocol flaw. It was an argument that spilled into cyberspace. A political decision moving a Soviet-era statue from a city center ignited protests and passions. As the argument heated, the network did too. At first, websites wobbled, government portals, media outlets, banks. Then the waves began, like someone turning on fire hoses aimed at anything with an Estonian domain. It wasn't a single attack. It was a series, changing patterns, targeting different organizations, using different kinds of traffic. Some were simple HTTP floods, countless devices trying to load the same page, drowning the server in requests. Some were pings and junk packets, the internet's equivalent of someone banging on your doorbell nonstop. The initial foothold in a DDoS isn't a foothold at all, it's a flash mob. Compromised machines around the world, home computers and small servers, all enrolled in botnets that could be rented like equipment. Point them at a target, and you don't need to break the lock, you block the sidewalk. Latvia, Russia, the United States, elsewhere the traffic didn't respect borders, it never does. The effect was simple and devastating. When people tried to reach their bank to pay a bill or their news site to find out what was going on, the pages timed out. When officials tried to post updates, the site was gone before the words landed. The country didn't go dark, it went quiet. Impact is hard to tally in tidy numbers. Some sites were down for hours at a time, others for days, with outages coming in waves over roughly 3 weeks. Banks throttled services, newspapers strained to stay reachable, government communications were intermittent. There were losses measured in euros, yes, but the heavier toll was psychological and civic, the sense that a digital crowd could gather outside your storefront and keep you shuttered without ever touching the door. The response was as much organizational as technical. Estonian networks implemented stricter filtering, dropped traffic from untrusted ranges, and leaned on partners to scrub the noise. Some services moved to overseas hosts or content delivery networks that could absorb floods. Government coordination grew tighter. And in the years that followed, Estonia turned a national bruise into a kind of muscle memory. The country invested in cyber capacity and helped stand up a place for the world to think about this problem together. The lesson wasn't just that DDoS can silence. It was that resilience isn't about being invulnerable. It's about being able to speak when someone wants to shout you down. All three of these stories dance on the same chord. Conficker spread because ordinary moments are enough when the small, quiet safeguards aren't in place. Ukraine's blackout happened because the path to a big lever ran through everyday tools and habits. Estonia's silence lasted as long as it took to organize a counterbeat and lean on outside help. In every case, the attackers didn't have to create a new law of physics. They exploited neglected chores and brittle assumptions. Think about the full timelines, side by side. Initial foothold, a missing update in a Windows service. A macro-enabled document in an inbox, a rented crowd of compromised devices aimed at a URL. Escalation, a worm killing off defenses and hopping from pocket to pocket. An adversary gathering keys and learning the map. A wave of traffic adjusting techniques as defenders closed doors. Payload and impact, a botnet that delivered spam and confusion at extraordinary scale. A real-world blackout that sent people into the cold for hours and burned months of recovery into muscle memory. A national website blackout that taught the world how loud a silence can be. When an attack is framed this way, foothold, climb, impact, the mystery fades, and the control you still have comes into view. Not a magic shield, not a perfect wall, just a handful of habits and settings that break the rhythm the attacker expects. And those small moves, made consistently, don't just protect your laptop. They give the people around you more time to think when things go strange. So take 3 lessons home from these case files and keep them simple enough to stick. First, keep your systems updated and set them to do it automatically. Patches and reboots aren't glamorous, but they're the cheapest locks you'll ever buy. Second, use strong, phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication wherever you can. Prefer passkeys or an authenticator app over SMS, and make unique passwords the norm so a single compromise doesn't become a skeleton key. Third, treat email attachments and embedded content with suspicion by default. Disable macros unless absolutely required. Open unfamiliar documents in a viewer instead of the main app, and verify the unexpected by a different channel. None of this requires a security budget, it requires a pause. In a world where a worm can redirect your browser away from help, where a click can turn off a neighborhood, and where a crowd of hacked machines can drown out your voice, that pause right before you hit enable, right before you put off the update one more night, right before you type the code that just arrived by text, may be the most powerful defense you have. We tell stories about catastrophe because they clarify what normal should feel like. Quiet networks, honest screens, power that hums, and messages that get through. If this felt like sitting in a dim room with the map spread out and the flashlight on, that's by design. We'll keep decoding the past to make the present safer. Next time, we'll open another file. The names will change, the moves will feel familiar, and the lessons will stay human.